Hey Reddit, I'm in a bit of a mess right now and I have no idea what to do. Maybe just writing it all down will help me figure it out. So here goes. My name's Milana and I work at this little boutique tailor shop in downtown Manhattan. You know the kind, tucked away between a cafe that's always bustling and a bookshop no one ever seems to leave. It's a quiet life for the most part, hemming dresses, adjusting suits, and stitching memories into the fabric of people's lives. I've been here for 3 years, ever since I moved to the city from a small town in Illinois. Honestly, I love it. I've always had a thing for fashion, especially the art of creating something beautiful from just a roll of fabric. But then there's Heather, my boss. She's one of those uptight, always perfect, never out of place types, the kind that makes you feel like you're always one mistake away from disaster. And today, Reddit, disaster struck. It all started with this ultra-wealthy client, Victoria Hathaway. Picture the kind of woman who walks in and you can literally smell the money. She's been a regular here for years, and she's the type who knows exactly what she wants and won't take no for an answer. Last week, she dropped off a dress, an outrageously expensive one, might I add, and it was my job to make some alterations. Easy enough, right? I've done this 1,000 times. But then, everything went sideways. Yesterday I was in the middle of a rush. There were a couple of other orders that were running late, and Heather was breathing down my neck. Somehow, I must have grabbed the wrong thread, or maybe I was just so tired I wasn't paying enough attention. Long story short, I ended up ruining Victoria's dress. A tear right down the side. It's not something that can be hidden or fixed without changing the entire design. When Heather found out, she went ballistic. Like, I'm talking full-on meltdown. She threatened to fire me on the spot, said I'd have to pay for the dress out of my own pocket. I don't have that kind of money, Reddit. This dress costs more than a year's rent on my apartment. I was freaking out, my heart was pounding, and I felt like the walls were closing in. Just as Heather was about to call Victoria, the bell above the door jingled, and in walked this guy. Tall, dark hair, perfectly put together like someone who stepped out of a GQ magazine. His name's Tom, and as I found out later, he's the son of some big-time business mogul. What he was doing in our tiny little shop, I have no idea. But he took one look at the situation, saw me practically on the verge of tears, and told Heather to give me a minute to explain myself. Heather, surprisingly, shut up for once. Tom and I stepped outside, and that's when he hit me with the craziest proposal I've ever heard. He said he could make all this go away, he'd cover the cost of the dress, smooth things over with Victoria, everything. But in return, he needed something from me. He needed a wife. Yeah, you read that right. Tom needs a wife, and he wants me to be the one to do it. He didn't give me many details, just said it was a business arrangement, nothing personal. It would be a fake marriage, something to do with some deal his father's working on, and I'd be paid well for my trouble. Enough to cover my rent, bills, everything, for at least the next year. I know it sounds insane, and maybe it is, but I don't see any other way out of this. Heather's ready to toss me out on the street, and I can't afford to lose this job, not to mention the dress. If I don't agree to this, I'm screwed. So Reddit, what do I do? Do I take the deal and marry this guy I've known for all of 5 minutes? Or do I try to figure out another way to fix the mess I'm in? I'm just so lost right now, and I could really use some advice. All right, Reddit, I'm back. So I took some time to think about everything, and after a sleepless night, I made a decision. I'm going through with it. I'm going to marry Tom. I know this sounds absolutely bonkers, but trust me, it's not like I had a whole lot of options. Heather wasn't bluffing about firing me, and there's no way I could cover the cost of that dress. Plus, Tom's offer was tempting, too tempting. So the next morning, I met up with him to talk about the details. We decided to meet at a cafe near my apartment, somewhere public, just in case he turned out to be a complete psycho. I was nervous as hell. When he walked in, though, he was just as calm and collected as before. He ordered a coffee, and we sat down in a corner booth. Tom didn't waste any time getting to the point. He explained that his father, Robert, is the CEO of a major real estate company. Apparently there's a deal in the works, a huge one that could change the future of the company. But here's the kicker: part of the deal involves some old-school, family-oriented investors who want to see stability and commitment, and nothing screams stability more than a nice, wholesome marriage. That's where I come in. Tom needs a wife to show these investors that he's serious, grounded, and ready to settle down. It's all an act, of course. A year, maybe less, just long enough to seal the deal. After that, we'd quietly divorce, and I'd walk away with a hefty sum and a clean slate. Tom laid it all out in front of me, no hidden agendas, no surprises at least. That's what he said. He even showed me a draft of the contract his lawyer had put together. It was all there in black and white: financial support, living arrangements, and most importantly, a clear exit strategy. But read it, as straightforward as it all seemed, something about it felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than Tom was letting on. His whole demeanor was so controlled, so precise, like he was used to orchestrating every part of his life down to the last detail. And that made me wonder, why me? Out of all the women he could have chosen, why did he walk into that little tailor shop on that exact day and pick me? I asked him, point blank, why he wanted me to do this. He just smiled, a little too perfectly, and said, "You seemed like someone I could trust, and someone who needed a little help." That answer didn't exactly put me at ease, but at that point I was too deep in to back out. We agreed on a timeline. The wedding would happen fast, within a week. A small, private ceremony, just enough to make it official. We'd live together, of course, but Tom promised it would be strictly professional. 2 separate rooms, separate lives, and absolutely no emotional entanglements. He drove me home after our meeting, and as I watched his car disappear down the street, it hit me: I'm about to marry a man I barely know. And for what? To save myself from a mistake and a boss who would rather see me fail than help me out of a jam? My gut is telling me there's something more here, something Tom isn't telling me. But for now, I'm locked into this crazy plan. So that's where I'm at, Reddit. In less than a week, I'm going to be Mrs. Milana Blake. The clock is ticking, and I can't help but wonder, what the hell have I gotten myself into? So, I'm officially Mrs. Milana Blake now. Yeah, it still feels weird just typing that out, but let me back up and tell you how this whole whirlwind of a week went down. After our meeting at the cafe, everything moved at lightning speed. Tom wasn't kidding when he said he wanted this done quickly. He had everything lined up: venue, efficient, even a dress. I didn't have to lift a finger. It was almost unsettling how easily everything fell into place, like he'd done this 100 times before. The wedding itself was surreal, to say the least. We had it at this small, private chapel on the Upper East Side. It was one of those places you'd never notice unless you knew exactly where to look, hidden behind tall iron gates and surrounded by ivy-covered walls. It was beautiful, but there was something about it that felt so cold. There were only a handful of people there. Tom's father, Robert Blake, showed up, of course. He's every bit as intimidating as I imagined: tall, silver-haired, and with this presence that just commands a room. He didn't say much to me, just gave me a once-over and nodded in approval, like I was some kind of business deal he'd just signed off on. There was also Tom's best friend, Mark, who seemed nice enough, though he kept giving Tom these weird, knowing looks. I couldn't tell if it was concern or amusement, but either way, it was unsettling. As for me, I had no one to invite. My family's back in Illinois, and they have no idea what's going on. I couldn't exactly tell them I was getting married out of the blue, especially not under these circumstances. So there I was, standing in front of a man I barely knew, with no one in my corner. The ceremony itself was quick: no frills, no fuss. I stood there in a dress that Tom had picked out, which, by the way, was gorgeous, but not something I would have chosen for myself. We exchanged vows that were just for show, signed the papers, and that was it. No big kiss, no celebration, just a couple of awkward handshakes and a nod from Robert that signaled we were done. Afterward, Tom drove us to his place, our place now, I guess. He lives in this ridiculous penthouse overlooking Central Park. It's all glass and steel, modern to the point of being sterile. There's no warmth, no personality. It's like a show home, not somewhere someone actually lives. Tom showed me to my room, which was basically a luxury hotel suite in itself. He was polite, distant, and made it clear that we'd be sticking to the agreement: separate rooms, separate lives. But as he was about to leave, he turned to me with this serious look in his eyes and said, "Remember, this is just for appearances, but that doesn't mean you're not important in this. If you need anything, anything at all, just ask." It was the first time he'd said something that felt real, but before I could respond, he was out the door, leaving me alone in this cavernous, empty space. So now I'm here, in this beautiful room that doesn't feel like mine, married to a man who's practically a stranger, and I can't shake the feeling that I've stepped into something way over my head. There's this tension in the air, like something big is about to happen, and I have no idea what it is. Tom's been busy with work, at least that's what he says, so I've hardly seen him since the wedding. Part of me is relieved, but another part is starting to wonder if I'll ever really know who he is and what's going on behind that perfectly controlled exterior. And then there's Robert. I've only seen him once since the wedding, but the way he looked at me, I don't know, Reddit. It was like he was sizing me up, trying to figure out what Tom sees in me, or maybe trying to decide if I'm worth whatever this whole charade is costing him. I keep thinking back to that first day in the tailor shop, wondering how different my life would be if Tom hadn't walked in. Would I have figured out another way to fix my mistake? Or was this all inevitable, like some twisted fate pulling me into a world I don't belong in? I'm still trying to make sense of it all, and the more I think about it, the more questions I have. What's really going on with Tom? What's the real reason he needed this marriage? And most importantly, what's going to happen next? Stay tuned, Reddit. I have a feeling things are about to get a lot more complicated. I wish I could say things have settled down, but that would be a lie. If anything, the tension has only gotten worse. I'm starting to realize that I'm caught up in something much bigger than a simple marriage of convenience. It all started a few days after the wedding. Tom had been staying out late, working, or so he said. I tried not to overthink it, reminding myself that this was all just business. But then, one night, I couldn't sleep. The penthouse felt suffocatingly silent, and my mind wouldn't stop racing. So I decided to explore a bit, hoping a walk around the apartment would calm me down. That's when I found a door at the end of the hallway, slightly ajar. I don't know why, but something drew me to it. I pushed it open and found myself in what looked like a home office. It was different from the rest of the place, darker, more lived in. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and a large desk sat in the middle of the room, cluttered with papers. I shouldn't have snooped, I know that, but I couldn't help myself. Something about the room felt off, like it didn't belong to the Tom I knew. And then I saw a photograph on the desk, half hidden under a stack of files. It was of Tom, younger, maybe in his early 20s, standing next to a woman I didn't recognize. She was beautiful, with dark hair and a smile that lit up the whole picture. But what caught my attention was the way Tom was looking at her, like she was the center of his universe. I didn't have time to think about it because just then, I heard the front door open. Panicking, I put the photo back and slipped out of the room, trying to act normal, but my heart was racing, and a million questions were running through my mind. Who was she? And why had Tom never mentioned her? When I saw Tom, he looked as composed as ever, but there was something different in his eyes, something distant. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something from me, and it wasn't just about the woman in the photo. It was something bigger, something that had been brewing long before we met. The next day, I decided to dig a little deeper. I'm not proud of it, but I started looking through Tom's things while he was out. I didn't find much. He's careful, I'll give him that. But what I did find only made me more uneasy. There were letters, all addressed to Tom but sent from different places: Europe, Asia, even South America. They were vague, talking about progress and the situation but never specifying what they were referring to. It was like reading pieces of a puzzle, but I didn't have enough of the picture to make sense of it. And then there was the name that kept popping up: Jackson Hale. Whoever he is, it's clear he's important. But every time I tried to bring him up casually with Tom, he'd change the subject or brush it off, saying it was just business. But I could tell from the way he tensed up that it wasn't just business. Not to him, anyway. Things came to a head last night. Tom came home late again, looking more stressed than I've ever seen him. He didn't even acknowledge me, just went straight to the office and shut the door. I couldn't just sit there pretending everything was fine, so I followed him and knocked. "Tom, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me, and for the first time since we met, I saw real fear in his eyes. Not fear of me, but of something else, something he couldn't control. He didn't say anything, just nodded for me to come in. I sat down across from him, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who's Jackson Hale?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but knowing I was way past that. Tom's expression darkened, and for a moment I thought he was going to shut me out again. But then, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Milana, there are things going on that I can't explain to you, not yet. But you have to trust me when I say that I'm trying to protect you." Protect me from what? I asked, frustration bubbling up inside me. "Tom, you dragged me into your world without telling me what's really going on. I deserve to know the truth." He looked at me for a long time, like he was weighing whether or not to tell me. And then, finally, he spoke. "Jackson Hale is. Let's just say he's not someone you want to be on the wrong side of. My father and we've been dealing with him for years. This marriage, everything, it's part of a larger plan to keep our family safe. But things are getting more complicated. And I'm not sure how much longer I can keep you out of it." That's all he would say. No matter how much I pressed, he refused to give me any more details. But now I know that whatever's happening, it's dangerous. And it's not just about business deals or fake marriages. There's something much darker at play, and I have a sinking feeling that I'm in way over my head. So that's where I'm at, Reddit. I'm living in a penthouse with a man who's hiding more secrets than I can count, and I have no idea what's going to happen next. All I know is that I'm not just playing the role of Tom's wife anymore. I'm caught in the middle of something real, and it's starting to scare the hell out of me. I'm not sure who to trust or what to believe, but I have to figure it out before it's too late. It's been a few days since my last update, and things have gone from bad to worse. I'm starting to feel like I'm living in a thriller novel, except there's no guarantee of a happy ending. After that conversation with Tom, I couldn't just sit around waiting for the next shoe to drop. I had to do something, anything, to get a handle on what was happening around me. So I started keeping a closer eye on Tom. I know it sounds paranoid, but when you're living with someone who's clearly hiding something, you start to notice the little things, like how his phone is always on silent, and how he steps out of the room to take certain calls, or how he's been more distracted, more distant than ever. The night everything started to unravel, Tom had another one of his late meetings by this point. I'd learned to expect them, but something about that night felt different. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the anxiety gnawing at the back of my mind. Tom had barely said a word to me before he left, and when he did, I decided to follow him. I know it was risky, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to know where he was going. So I grabbed a coat, slipped out of the penthouse, and took a cab to where I knew he usually held these meetings, a private club in the city that's known for its discretion. I watched from across the street as Tom walked inside. I felt like an idiot, hiding in the shadows like some amateur detective, but I was desperate for answers. After about an hour, I was starting to think this was a bad idea. But then, I saw him leave, except he wasn't alone. A man was with him, and even from a distance, I could tell this wasn't just a casual acquaintance. The guy was tall, built like a linebacker, and had this air of authority that sent a shiver down my spine. I had no idea who he was, but something told me he wasn't someone you'd want to cross. Tom and the man talked for a while, their faces serious, before they both got into separate cars and drove off in opposite directions. I knew I had to follow the new guy, but I had no idea how. I was about to give up and go home when a cab pulled up right behind his car, and the driver rolled down the window, giving me a questioning look. I don't know what came over me, but I jumped in, gave the driver a quick, "Follow that car," and we were off. I followed him to an office building downtown, a tall, nondescript place that looked like any other corporate skyscraper in the city. But what really caught my attention was the name on the front, Hale Industries. My stomach dropped. Could this be Jackson Hale's headquarters? The guy Tom had warned me about? The man I was following went inside, and I knew better than to try and follow him in. I told the cab driver to wait for a minute while I tried to figure out what to do next. That's when I saw her standing near the entrance, talking to someone on her phone. The woman from the photo. The one who Tom had looked at like she was his whole world. My heart was pounding as I watched her. She looked different from the photo, older, more serious, but it was definitely her. And the way she carried herself, with that same confidence and authority as the man who'd just gone inside, told me she was someone important, someone who might have answers. I knew it was a long shot, but I couldn't just leave without trying to find out more. So I gathered all the courage I had left and approached her. "Excuse me," I said, my voice shaking. "I know this might sound strange, but do you know Tom Blake?" She turned to look at me, her eyes narrowing slightly as she sized me up. For a moment I thought she might just walk away, but then she nodded. "Yes, I do. And you are?" I swallowed hard. "My name's Milana. I'm his wife." Her eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw something flash across her face, surprise, maybe even regret. But it was gone just as quickly as it had appeared. She glanced around, then motioned for me to follow her inside the building. We ended up in a small conference room on one of the upper floors, with a stunning view of the city that I barely noticed. My mind was racing with questions, but before I could ask any of them, she spoke. "My name is Evelyn," she said, her voice calm but firm, "and if you're Tom's wife, then you deserve to know what's really going on." What she told me next shook me to my core. Evelyn wasn't just some random woman from Tom's past, she was his ex-fiancée. They'd been together for years, but things had ended abruptly when Tom's father, Robert, got involved in a shady business deal with Jackson Hale. The details were murky, but it sounded like Robert had crossed a line, and Jackson wasn't the forgiving type. To protect Tom, Evelyn had walked away, making it look like the breakup was her idea. But she hadn't gone far. She'd been working with Jackson ever since, trying to keep tabs on Robert and make sure Tom didn't get caught in the crossfire. And now, she was trying to do the same for me. "Milana, you're in serious danger," Evelyn said, her expression deadly serious. "Jackson isn't someone you want to mess with. This marriage, it's just a shield, something to keep you and Tom safe for now. But it won't last forever. Jackson's patience is running out, and when it does, he'll come after anyone who gets in his way." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I thought this marriage was just a business arrangement, a way for Tom to secure his future. But now I was realizing that I was just a pawn in a much larger, much more dangerous game. I asked Evelyn what I should do, but she didn't have an easy answer. "You need to be careful," she said. "Don't trust anyone, not even Tom. He's trying to protect you, but he's in deep, and he's not telling you everything. If you want to survive this, you need to start thinking for yourself." She gave me a phone number, someone she said I could trust if things got worse, then told me to go home and act like everything was normal. "Whatever you do," she said, "don't let Jackson know you've talked to me. He can't know we're on the same side." So now I'm back in the penthouse, trying to act like nothing's changed. But everything has changed. Tom doesn't know that I've spoken to Evelyn, and I don't know how much longer I can keep this charade up. I'm scared, Reddit. more scared than I've ever been in my life. I don't know who to trust, and I don't know how to get out of this mess, but I do know one thing: I can't just sit here and wait for something to happen. I have to start playing the game, and I have to figure out how to win. Things have taken a wild turn, but this time, I've got some good news. Buckle up because it's a lot. After my conversation with Evelyn, I was more scared and confused than ever, but I also knew I had to act. I couldn't just sit around and wait for everything to come crashing down, so I decided to confront Tom directly. I wasn't sure how he'd react, but I figured honesty was my best shot. When Tom came home that night, I didn't waste any time. "Tom, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. He looked at me, sensing something was off, and sat down across from me. "What's going on, Milana?" "I know about Evelyn," I blurted out. "And I know about Jackson Hale. I met her today, and she told me everything." For a moment, Tom just stared at me, his face pale. I could see the gears turning in his mind, trying to figure out what to do next. But then, to my surprise, he let out a long sigh and buried his face in his hands. "I never wanted you to be dragged into this mess," he said, his voice thick with regret. "I thought I could protect you by keeping you in the dark, but I see now that was a mistake." I wasn't expecting this level of honesty, and it threw me off guard. "Tom, what's really going on? Why is Jackson Hale such a threat? And why did you marry me if it wasn't just for business?" Tom looked up at me, his eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before: vulnerability. "Milana, this whole thing started with my father. Robert got involved with Jackson Hale years ago, and he made some bad deals. When it all started to go south, Jackson came after our family. Evelyn left to protect me, to keep me out of it, but I couldn't let her face it alone. So I tried to distance myself from everything by creating this marriage. It was supposed to be a shield, a way to keep you safe and to buy time while I figured out a way to deal with Jackson once and for all." "But why me?" I asked, my voice softer now, trying to understand. "Why did you choose me?" "Because you're strong, Milana. Stronger than you know. And because from the moment I met you, I knew you were different. I thought if I could keep you close, I could protect you. But I also wanted you in my life, even if it started out as just an arrangement. It became more than that for me. I didn't realize it until now, but I've fallen in love with you." I was stunned. This was the last thing I expected, but looking at Tom, I could see the truth in his eyes. He wasn't lying to me. I could feel it, and in that moment I realized that despite everything, the lies, the danger, I cared about him too. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. Tom took my hand, squeezing it gently. "We fight back, together. Evelyn and I have been working on a plan to take down Jackson once and for all. She's been gathering evidence against him, and we're close to having enough to bring him to justice. But I need your help, Milana. I can't do this without you." It was a lot to take in, but I knew there was no turning back now. "I'm with you," I said, feeling a newfound strength in my words. "Whatever it takes, I'm with you." Over the next few days, Tom and I worked closely with Evelyn, piecing together everything we needed to finally take Jackson down. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I doubted if we'd make it through. But having Tom by my side, knowing that he trusted me and that we were in this together, gave me the courage to keep going. The plan came together faster than I expected. With Evelyn's connections and the evidence we'd gathered, we were able to get the authorities involved. It turns out Jackson Hale had been under investigation for years, but no one had ever gotten close enough to bring him to justice. Until now. The day we handed over everything to the authorities was the most nerve-wracking of my life. But as I stood there with Tom, watching as Jackson was finally arrested, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. We'd won. In the aftermath, Tom and I had a lot to talk about. Our marriage had started as a lie, but it had become something real, something neither of us had expected. We decided to give it a real shot, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. As for Evelyn, she's finally free from the burden of protecting Tom from a distance. She's starting a new life, and we still keep in touch. She's become a friend, someone who understands what we've been through better than anyone else. So, here I am, Reddit, on the other side of what felt like an impossible situation. Tom and I are building a life together, one based on honesty and trust this time. It hasn't been easy, but we're stronger for it. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. I guess sometimes, even in the darkest situations, you can find a happy ending. You just have to fight for it.